And now, our special guest speaker. Every year, the Honorable U.S. Congressman Brady opens our conference. It's a tradition here. For many years, he's been so popular that we keep bringing him back as our actual kickoff of this conference. Congressman Brady is Deputy Whip for the GOP leadership team, and he's a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee, and you know what that means. Very important. He's also chairman on the Subcommittee on Trade and a senior member of the Social Security Subcommittee. And he's vice chair of the Joint Economic Committee, which means he's the perfect kickoff to this Economic Outlook Conference. Please help me welcome U.S. Congressman Kevin Brady.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Nelda, for again introducing me, inviting me to the conference. This is my favorite event of the year. You learn so much from this conference. You hear from people who are in such key aspects of our economy in Montgomery County, the region, the country as well. I love being here. I want to thank the co-chairs, Danny Schroeder and Steve Stepanoff, for your leadership for this event. Nelda, Bruce, of course, and again, the Chamber, 25 years of leadership in this conference is really, really remarkable. And I'm going to stay to listen to the speakers. I want to hear Greg and others talk about the economic future and challenges going forward. Today, I'd like to talk about the two of the biggest issues we face in the country, our debt as a country and our economy, how one drives the other, and how the choices we make as a country and as a people this year will shape our economic future perhaps for decades. America's debt crisis. Right now, we're adding debt at just remarkable levels. The debt added in recent years, $3.5 trillion just in the past 2 years, over $5 trillion just in the past 4 years. America, it has one of the worst annual deficits in the developed world. We're borrowing 40 cents for every dollar that we're spending. And to put it in real terms, just in the past 2 years, we've added more debt as a country per second than the average American makes per year. That picture is a guy who fainted when we told him that was the case. The path ahead looks even worse. This is the projected debt of the U.S. in the future. And what it shows is right now in publicly owned debt, what we've gone out to the market and borrowed, we're at about 60-some% of our economy. That's how they tend to measure this thing. That itself is a yellow warning flag. But this chart is actually the optimistic one. This one doesn't include our gross debt, the transfers from Social Security, Medicare, and entitlements that really add up when we compare apples to apples against other countries. We're all this chart. There's a worse one, and in fact, this year, our debt will reach 100% of our economy. And every economist that I've met with agree that when any country gets to a debt level of 90% or more, their economy starts to drag. It's just like in your business, just like in your home. When so much goes to debt payment, there's less for research, less for marketing, less for the high staff. Same thing happens in the country. And already, the United States this year will hit the red light in a major way. There is consequences to this high debt, as we all know, whether it's in your family or in your business. Just in real terms, the debt per person, $45,000 for every man, woman, child in America, and growing. A baby born today owes a new Lexus to the government. By the time they're 13, they'll owe a second Lexus to the government. And by the time they're 22, starting their first real job after college, they will owe the equivalent of a third Lexus to their government. It's stunning how much we as Americans will owe if we stay on this current path. Now, that young person isn't actually going to owe 3 Lexuses, but they pay a price a different way in the economy. You have, because of that high debt, what you have is a sluggish economy in the future, fewer opportunities for young people. You have lower business investment, which Greg and others will tell you today translates directly into jobs. A lower dollar higher interest rates, and you have the prospect of higher taxes on families, businesses, and job creators, which by itself, the expectation that you're going to end up paying more in taxes changes your behavior today. As any businessman here today who's looking at the prospect of the new national health care plan, running the numbers on new prices, you hesitate in making business investment and job investments because you know what's coming. Same thing happens when the country has high debt and you know you can face higher taxes in the future. This chart, and apparently I've decided I'm getting paid by the slide, so you're going to see, a lot of these slides here. I don't spend my time on Craigslist, more on making slides, really, for conferences like this. This chart, I put in there just to please me. Oftentimes I hear the White House talk about the deficit that the President and the White House inherited, and indeed he did from a Democratic Congress. But as you look at the budget going forward, the budget he just proposed last week, he's proposed record deficits for the next decade. So I asked my folks at Joint Economic Committee, I said, look, show me what the deficits were the day you walked into office and the deficits for the next 10 years today. That blue line, the small blue line, is the deficits that our Congressional Budget Office proposed or projected for 10 years the day we changed administrations. It totals about $1.88 trillion. But with the President's new budget, CBO's new figures show that over the same period, the deficits are more likely going to be $8 trillion. And that's the rosy news, because that dip down there at the bottom proposes that we're going to increase taxes on small businesses and job creators, that we're not going to pay for solutions to Medicare and doctors. It uses rosy economic forecasts and lower interest rates out in the future, none of which is going to occur. And so those deficits are going to be even worse than this shows. In the new budget, which we're running up to new numbers now, but it proposes $8.7 trillion of new spending, above and beyond what we have today. The size of government will double in dollar figures during the President's first term. It'll hit more than 25% of the economy, the highest since World War II. That's a huge amount of our economic productivity going to sustain this economy. And from 2008 to 2021, if we don't change our ways, those 14 years will be the largest 14 deficits in American history going forward. And as I said, this chart is actually rosy when you look at what the real numbers are going to come out from the Congressional Budget Office here very soon. So here is where we're at on the crisis. The size of the U.S. government's at unsustainable levels. We all know that. The debt deficits threaten to slow our economic growth and recovery. That makes sense. And debt will ultimately become a threat to our national security. Don't take my word for it. Admiral Mike Mullen, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said this recently. National debt is the single greatest threat to national security. It weakens us economically, diverts dollars that would go to a strong defense. So debt has a huge impact across this country and in the future. So the question is, how do we tackle this debt? Do we raise taxes? Do we increase the savings? Do we shrink the size of government? So how do we tackle it? Most economists agree that lowering the size of government and what you owe does create long-term growth. Most economists believe that. There's real disagreement about whether it increases growth in the short term. Economists who brought us the stimulus, who believe ultimately that federal spending, government spending, drives the economy. If the federal government spends $1, it generates $1 plus. We've seen this in the stimulus. We've seen this in the arguments in Washington today. They believe that any cuts in government spending will harm the economy. And they also believe it doesn't matter the way you lower your debt. You can raise taxes, you can cut spending, it has the same impact. But there is a growing body of evidence that says that cutting spending to lower debt, not raising taxes, but cutting spending, is good not just for the long haul, but can give a short-term boost to the economy as well. So I asked my Joint Economic Committee staff here recently, that question. This is the Joint Economic Committee staff, you may remember, is the one that spent 4 months, days, nights, and weekends going through the President's new health care plan to show you what Obamacare, or as some call it, actually looks like. And what they, after going through all 2,801 pages, developed an organization chart. This, by the way, as you know, we could only fit 1/3 of the new bureaucracy on this chart. It's actually deeper than that. So after they finished that, I turned around and said, here's a new task. Look at the economies of the world, especially our competitors, who have run up larger sums of debt. Tell me what succeeded in boosting their economies, and tell us what didn't boost their economies. In the next 2 weeks, that study is going to be announced. We're working on it, doing the finishing touches right now. We're running it by a number of economists, including a former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. Let me give you a little preview of it today. And it's based on an economic practice. It's called fiscal consolidation. But in real terms, all that means is countries that lower their debt, either by raising revenue and taxes or cutting spending as a percentage of their economy. I don't care much for the term fiscal consolidation. You hear much more of it outside America than the inside of it, but my guess is you're going to hear more of it because it's at the heart of the debate on how we get our spending under control and how we boost our economy at the same time. And you'll see as we go through here, the ultimate conclusion of this report, spend less, owe less, grow the economy as a result. We took a look at countries throughout the world, especially in Europe, and OECD are our competitors, our main developed countries that compete against day in and day out, to look at what succeeds in the economy. This is a report, a study that was done, including Kevin Hassett at American Enterprise Institute. And what the new study will show is that for many of our competitors, fiscal consolidation, the way they reduce their debt as a share of GDP, by cutting their spending, they actually accelerated their economic growth. The countries that did it a different way, that increased revenues more, equally or more than their spending cuts, relied on higher taxes as well as spending cuts, they had less success, dramatically less success in boosting their economy than other countries did. Here's some examples, just one-off examples. Canada, from 1989 to 1993, had anemic growth, 0.8%, by lowering the size of their government by 9%, just cutting their government, shrinking the size of it. They averaged 3.4% over the next dozen years. Good, strong, solid growth. Here's Sweden. They had not just high debt, but they had a negative economy for 4 years, 1989, 1993. By lowering the size of their government, the blue lines going up and down are the size of their GDP growth. The red line is the government and how it's shrinking. In Sweden, lowering the size of their government by 7% boosted their economy by an average of 3.5% over 16 years. So they continued good, strong economic growth by shrinking the size of government. New Zealand, which I just returned from, in fact, our congressional delegation flew out of Christchurch about 2.5 hours ahead of the quake. We stayed in the hotel that was down in the city center. Now it's structurally unsound. They've abandoned it. In fact, some of our delegation, business delegation, who returned to the United States, their clothes and all their travel and things are still in their hotel rooms. And some of our parties, some of the spouses that were along, were actually in Christchurch, the one that collapsed the afternoon before. But New Zealand is interesting. They had strong economic growth, as you can tell there, the blue line's moving upward. Then spending grew, their economy slipped. Then they went on, then they began to shrink the size of their debt by 9%, mainly by cutting spending. And their growth, boom, bounced right back up to an average 3%. Good, strong, steady growth. That's where they are today, although we're going to be struggling as a result of this second earthquake since September. Now, critics will look at these three countries and say, well, look, America's not like that. You know, we're different than those three countries, and they're right. But if you look at all the competitors that we deal with day in and day out, and the broader range of them, it's pretty hard to ignore the facts. What this study shows is that economies grew with spending less. In 2003, three economists took a look at 14 countries within the United States. They looked at them over 33 years. What they found, 19 different times, countries shrunk the size of their government and their economy took off as a result. More recent study in 2009, two economists took a look at our 21 OECD countries, our competitors, our major economies in the world. They looked at it over 37 years. They found 21 successful instances in 10 countries where shrinking the size of government by spending control boosted their economy. And then last year, three more economists took a look at a broad range of our competitors over a long period of time. They confirmed economic growth followed spending cuts. And as importantly, what they said was the cold showers. That is where you had sharp and sustained reductions, where countries actually meant seriously to reduce their spending. Those were the most effective ways to boost the economy, was to take, in effect, a cold shower, which my guess is our debt could use a lot of cold showers right now. Here's something else that's kind of interesting. All the savings are the same. This is what the study's going to announce. That the key to success was countries that took large, credible, and politically difficult to reverse spending cuts boosted their economy the most. The ones who actually showed the strongest political will and sent the signals to the markets and job creators they were serious about getting debt under control, that created the confidence to pull business investment back to the economy and get it moving again. So all savings weren't the same, and the best savings, as they identified them, to spur growth with countries that shrank their federal workforce, that began to live like businesses do within their means. They right-sized the size of their government. Beginning of the year, I introduced the Cuts Act. It cuts $153 billion out of our federal government. One of the tenets in it is to shrink the federal workforce by 10%. This one was easy. You do it by attrition. For every 3 job openings, you only fill 2. And you shrink the government by 10% over time. You can do it much quicker than that by not replacing any or replacing only 1 or 2. But shrinking the government works. Right-sizing your workforce works in countries just as it does in business. Eliminating obsolete agencies, sunsetting obsolete agencies in other countries work. In the recent bill passed the House, where we cut $100 billion from this year's budget between now and the end of the year in October, we eliminated almost 150 separate programs as a start, as a down payment. Curtailing subsidies to companies. We do a lot of it in the United States. Other countries do as well, from agriculture to Amtrak to electricity, telecommunications, air service. We do a lot of subsidies. When the government compels businesses to take certain actions as a result of subsidies, it curtails your growth. And then finally, reform entitlements, pensions and health care across the world, and our competitors are reforming theirs. The question is America reform ours? And what was interesting was this was the one area in the study that the research showed these cuts, these savings, didn't have to be immediate at all in the pensions and health care. They just had to be politically difficult to reverse. So you didn't have to make big changes to Social Security and Medicare in our case. You just have to make the changes that are credible, that people believe in, and that are going to be long-term. For example, Social Security, which we're going to see in a minute, you'll see this growth taking off on that. There are proposals within Congress where you don't touch Social Security at all for those who are 55 years or older. But for younger workers, you create sort of a two-tiered system. Where gradually, over decades, you raise the age of retirement. And then you link their Social Security not to wage indexes, but to price index. So their benefits stay current with what they're going to buy as a senior. Again, not touching anything immediate at all, but creating a large, credible, sustainable Social Security in the future. Medicare, There are proposals to do the same, and you're going to see this coming forward where we don't touch Medicare for people 55 years or older, even those for 10 years people anticipated coming in the current Medicare system. But you create options for younger workers coming in. For example, vouchers, where when you reach the age of 65, instead of being forced into Medicare, you can choose to keep the health care plan you're on. You'll get a voucher to continue that health care plan. Where, like the prescription drug plan, where we have hundreds of businesses competing for seniors business in states like Texas, where you create a Medicare system where you're not forced into one size fits all, but companies compete for your business and your health care services as a senior. There's lots of ideas that go this direction, all of which create credible reform and create the sort of, again, confidence in the business environment going forward. What's clear from this report, too, is more spending isn't the answer. If it were, we would have an economy unparalleled on the globe. The stimulus, as you know, $814 billion, a lot tends to get paid to that. But we ran the numbers, too. Since the stimulus began through January in the U.S., after spending all that money, we actually have 2.2 million fewer payroll jobs than when the stimulus began. $750 billion fewer jobs. 9% unemployment for the last 21 consecutive months. In the Houston area, as strong an economy as we are, we actually have 64,000 fewer payroll jobs than when the stimulus began. Federal overspending during the same period, 2009, 2010, 2011, depending on how you count overspending, fiscal policy from the government, you have over the last 2 years injected almost $5 trillion in the U.S. economy with very poor results. And that's not even counting the monetary policy, but the Fed's put in both for emergency, which, by the way, turned out to be extremely effective. But some of the QE2 they're doing today, that doesn't even, $5 trillion doesn't even count that. Clearly, if every government dollar was supposed to boost the economy, it did not. And there's good reason for it as a business. We can talk about that in a minute. The other thing that became clear is that higher taxes are not the answer, not just because it doesn't work with our competitors as they tackle their debt. But in the U.S., our debt and deficit is so high that the past 3 years, you could double everyone's income taxes in America, every man, woman, and child, and we'd still be running in debt. Still be running in debt. You could tax the wealthy, but look at who already carries the burden of our government today. The top 1% of earners share 40% of the tax burden. The top 10% carry almost 3/4 of the tax burden in the United States. Those, by the way, are professionals who have an outsized impact on our consumption. They're the ones who go into retail stores and buy. They're also the job creators in the United States. Those who some want to tax the most are actually the golden goose that helps drive the economy. And under the president's budget that he just released, he's proposed another $1.6 trillion in new taxes. The bulk of it are professionals and small businesses, including many in this room today. U.S. energy companies like Anadarko, ExxonMobil, Shell and Chevron, real estate trusts, or partnerships and investment firms, the debt tax, proposing to raise almost $100 billion. And again, the debt tax is still the number one reason family farms and family businesses don't get passed down to the next generation. And then another $129 billion on American companies that compete and win overseas, whether it is CBI down the road, Baker Hughes down the road, or any number of businesses in the Woodlands. Those who compete, those who win, the president's proposing to tax at a major level. So what's the challenge here at home? This is our budget in the United States, and I want to call attention to the red and the green pieces of the pie. This is the $3.5 trillion budget. But defense and discretionary are the areas people talk about the most, but they're the smallest part of our budget. Discretionary is that which is not on autopilot. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the other entitlements. The problem is 2/3 of our budget is on autopilot. It just spends by itself. A lot of the focus is on discretionary, but that's education, healthcare, roads, defense, obviously, you know about it. But that red area there is where most of Washington focuses on discretionary spending. It's a relatively small part of the budget, but the impact just isn't as big as you want. It was telling at the State of the Union the other night when the President talked about sort of his vision going forward as a country and competitiveness. He made one statement. He said, to start to control our budget, we're going to freeze discretionary spending for the next 5 years. You could have heard crickets chirping in the House chamber. One, Democrats don't want to cut any spending, and Republicans knew that simply wasn't enough. In fact, it was so quiet, I think I heard someone blink, because discretionary spending just isn't enough to get it done. It's all in the entitlements. You look at Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest, and then you look at our revenue. It's going to rebound. Our revenue is going to rebound as the economy gets better. But in a short number of years, our basic dollars that we have, entitlements will grow bigger than all the expenses and all the revenue we bring in. We won't have a dollar left for education, for health care, for roads. And the longer, because Medicare and Social Security get worse, they're bankrupt unless we take action. The longer we put off that process, the worse it is. Here's the strategy to reduce spending. The point is, these dangerous deficits and debt are much deeper than I think most acknowledge. I think it's a shock to many, like the President's Deficit Commission. Their goal, the Deficit Commission, their goal was to lower the deficits to only $500 billion a year. The goal was to lower the deficit to only $500 billion in losses each and every year. And they balanced the budget in their final report in 25 years. They balanced the budget in a quarter of a century. This debt is so big it really has required a change of our strategy on how to tackle it. That slide's in there because this elephant is simply too big to eat in one setting. And if anyone's from here from PETA, I'm not suggesting we eat elephants. But having offended them, let me continue with the theme of eating the elephant. We have to continue to reduce the debt every opportunity we get. I think for many of us who are concerned about the debt, it's sort of easy to think if we just have big savings in this stopgap measure, if we just have a good new budget that cuts some, if we just don't raise the debt ceiling, we'll all get the debt under control. The truth is, not any one of those, all those actions are important, not one of them gets the job done by itself. Boosting our economy by removing barriers to growth, whether it's regulation, higher taxes, higher health care, higher energy prices. It's all critical to creating business confidence. But creating confidence that America will get its financial house in order and the government will again live within its means is going to take years of hard decisions and persistence. Our strategy is to find savings and cut waste thoughtfully and relentlessly every opportunity we get until we get our financial house back in order and get back on the right path. Coming up in the next year, we have right now the stopgap, a continuing resolution. All that means is funding the government through the end of the year. Republicans last week cut $100 billion as a down payment. There's a lot of resistance to that. And if you want to ask me if we're going to face a government shutdown, I'll be glad to tell you my thoughts. Next up is the 2012 budgets. We're going to include the beginnings of Medicare entitlement reform. The debt ceiling comes in April, May, or June. At the end of the day, without question, the debt ceiling is going to be increased. America is going to pay its debts, period. The question is, are we going to start putting up the credit cards going forward? And Republicans will insist that we start the process of cutting up the credit cards, putting caps, putting limits on the size of this government. The problem we have in Washington today, everyone talks about deficit reduction, but they're sort of like the sinner who says, Lord, make me holy, just not now. the shopaholic who says, let me keep spending. You know, I promise reform, just not now. Now, it's time to do it weekly. We're going to do U-cuts. These are federal programs we put on the internet. The American taxpayer votes for it, and then we bring it to the floor for a vote so that everyone gets to see how their lawmaker, if they're serious or not about reducing spending. 2 weeks ago, we cut $500 million in the House simply by revoking the old presidential campaign commission. You know that checkoff box? You do. You know, an idea that's outlived its time by a major way can save us $500 million. And finally, at the end of the year, we have 12 separate bills to control the size of the government going forward. Final point here, spend less, owe less, grow the economy. That is the best strategy for this country going forward. And as we meet today at this economic conference, today is the 98th anniversary of the 16th Amendment. That's the income tax. It was purported to be small and modest, but grew and grew and grew over time. And the lesson I think we can learn from the income tax is if you give the government an inch of new power, it will grow to a mile or more. So the question we face as Americans right now at this time, this place, is if we're going to insist on a smaller, more limited, more efficient government that places power in our hands and boosts the economy rather than drags it down. With that, let me stop. Nelva, thank you for having me here.
Got a couple of minutes. If we have questions for Kevin Brady, we'll take a couple of them. Right there.
About offshore drilling in our area,
Offshore drilling moratorium, or now what we call the permatory. This has been very frustrating. We should have been put in place. You don't condemn the whole industry for one business's errors. Even though the moratorium has been lifted in shallow water for a long time, those permits are going very, very slowly. We're seeing companies right here in the Woodlands, great independent energy companies that laid off 75% of the workforce, waiting to get the permits to continue to explore the shallow water. In deep water, with those 33 rigs, we've already seen 5 leave. We're going to see more. They're not going to come back anytime soon. We predicted, when we predicted last year that we wouldn't have a permit by January, everyone scoffed at us. Today, it's hard to know if there'll be a permit in the first half of this year. That's got a real economic effect on the Gulf, on this country. As we're seeing with higher energy prices, the Gulf has been sort of the safety net for imported oil. We have to get that up and going. It's been a challenge to get the administration to start giving these permits out. Our companies know what to do. They're trying to file every permit they can. The guidance is so vague, the decisions so slow in coming. It's very frustrating.
One more. That's all right, CJ, go ahead.
Will the government shutdown be a positive or negative thing? Next question. Government's not going to shut down. And let me tell you why. The Republicans, we're here to cut spending, to boost the economy by getting our government under control. We're not there to shut down the government. We're hearing a lot of scare tactics from the White House, from Senate Democrats, Chuck Schumer and others. In the media, you open the paper every day to hear about preparations for shutdown. Let me tell you, I don't think there's a 1% chance it's going to happen. We've already said we're going to pass a series of stopgap measures, 2 weeks at a time, keep the government open, let everyone relax, let's go to work getting our budget under control. But here's the caveat. We're not going to agree to let spending continue at the same level. When you're already obese, when your car's already maxed out, you can't let that continue to happen. So in about 5 minutes from now, 15 minutes from now in Washington, House Republicans will unveil a 2-week measure to keep the government flowing, but we'll insist that we cut spending by $4 billion. That's the equivalent of $100 billion. Yeah. Because here's the point. If they just keep saying no, and we just keep government spending at the same level, you continue to run up more and more debt. So like the shopaholic, like the sinner who wants to get religion, we're going to insist that each extension of our government operation bring with it a spending cut. And we show the American public we're serious about it. You tell me if that's the right approach or not. I think it is.
That you're very proud to represent the 8th District. We know that you're proud to live here in the Woodlands Township, but let me say on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for what you're doing for us in Washington.